Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so for those that will be listening to this later on, sorry, we're just starting out, and I talked about we have a GitHub repo. You would always find the link somewhere where you can use to catch up on anything you missed and all that. That's what we've said so far. So today we are talking about strings and arrays, and the first thing I'm going to be doing, I'm not going in depth into this. We have resources you can use to read up if you feel like you want a lot of more knowledge, more context on strings, what strings are, what arrays are. I'm not going into the basic in depth of what exactly strings are. This is just a quick overview or a kind of refresher, how they put it, crash course on strings and arrays. So basically, the first thing is, what's the relationship with strings and arrays? You know, people see, you hear strings and arrays, so common, it's like, everybody says as if they're like, you know, bread and butter. So the only thing is that arrays are similar to strings in the sense that string is a character, is an array of characters. So naturally, an array is like a collection of elements of the same data type, like maybe data type is integer, either even string itself or characters or anything, whether even an object like a user-defined data type. So array most times is used as a collection of these similar elements. You want to group things together. You want to have a series of things. You always like to put them in an array. So, and for arrays, you can always hold different types of elements in them, just like I said, any data type, anything, whether object, defined data type, whether primitive data type. But strings contains only characters. So the relationship between them is that for string, it is an array of characters. So it's an array of data type characters. That's just the basic relationship. And the very important thing I want you to take note of is that we have different types of arrays. We have different types of, like we have different ways strings can be, depending on the language you're using. Which brings me to the next slide of, when you are going into any interview, always know your language very well. So some quick fast facts you can know in the language you can point out, or things you can easily, you should know, like a must know before going for an interview, is the way strings and arrays work in that language. Now, for some languages, when it comes to string, you can't modify them. Most languages actually, strings are immutable. What does it mean? It means that you can't literally change them. When you have a string called maybe happy, and you literally want to add something to it, like maybe you want to add S to it, adding just that S alone requires you having to copy the happy into another new string and then adding the S. That's what happens. So you can't modify a string. Anytime you are literally modifying the string, what you're doing is copying the former string into a new string and adding the new set of characters to that string. So it is very important for you to note that and know whichever language you are using. I know in C, C++ or C, I don't know, both of them, strings are mutable, so meaning you can change it. But for most other languages, like C# that I know, and Python that I think I've used, they don't allow, like strings are not mutable, so you can't change them. So you need to take note of these facts, because those are the things you need to put into consideration when you are considering the time complexity of whether a string question or an array question or anything. Another thing to note in string is comparison. How does comparison work? How do you compare two strings? How do you check if they are equal? For some languages, you can just do equal to, like you can do the double equal. And for some other languages, let me see, is there a point? How can I use this pointer? Oh, yeah. Trying to look for a pointer. Yeah. Yeah, I like this. Okay, so I was saying that for some languages, you can do things like this, equal. and it compares the string equally, and it works. But for some other languages, this will not compare, to not give you the right answer. So for like C# now, I know if you want to compare your string very well, you need to use dot equals to be able to know that, yeah, I'm doing the right comparison. And some languages probably they use dot compare or some other thing. You need to take notes of that. Also, another thing to take note of is when comparing strings, some languages have default in the sense of case sensitivity. Like by default, some language take into consideration of case sensitivity. Some language don't take into consideration of case sensitivity. Like when you're comparing things like maybe H and comparing capital letter H, they are not going to be the same in some language. And for some language, they are the same. So you need to check that with your language also. So that if you need to, like in C#, okay, I'll be saying C# a lot because I'll be using it recently. And that's what most of what's in my head. So in C# now, if you need to like if you want to ignore the case sensitivity, you want H to be equal to uppercase H, you have to put whether string dot ignore case or something. You literally need to add a flag or something. So you need to check that also so that you know it ahead of time. Also, you need to, very, very important, need to know how they convert strings to array in your language, the language you are most comfortable with. When I mean your language, that's what I mean. And also vice versa. This is because, I mentioned earlier that strings are not mutable. And the best way to be able to work with them whenever you are making any operation, anything at all, that you know that you're going to be changing any character, the best way is to convert to an array first. We said string is an array of characters. So when you convert it to an array, and arrays are mutable, you can change arrays. So when anything is in array, you can like literally change them. Is anybody saying anything? Okay. Okay, I'll assume nobody's saying anything. Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to like let me know. Just cut me and let me know. Okay, so I was if you the best way to work with strings is to be able to convert them to characters, especially when you have to modify them. When you convert them to characters, it's easier for you to work with without having any overhead. You are not thinking about the fact that, oh, what's the cost of this operation? You literally know the way array works. And when you are done with whatever operation you want to do and you want to return the new string, you can just convert it back to string. So you need to know how to convert string to array, work with it, array of characters. Whenever you are done with it, convert it back to string. Very important to note. Now for arrays, you need to know, for some languages, we have different static and dynamic arrays. Now, what I mean is, when you say static arrays, it means once you define the length of the array from beginning, you can't increase it. So the modification of this one in this case is that you can increase the length. So when I have an array, say I define my array initially of an element containing 6 characters. Along the line, I can't change my mind and say, oh, I want 8 characters now, and it should contain 8. So some arrays, or for some languages, by default, arrays are not expandable. But for some languages, by default, the arrays are expandable. You need to check that also. So this is the array side now. This is how I've talked about string. Now, for example, in C#, when you use array specifically, it is not expandable. It is like, how would I put it? Static, yeah. So you can't change length. But if you want to use a dynamic array, you use something called list in C#. So now you still classify list and all those. List is not like it's a different type of data type when it comes to that language, but naturally we classify all of them as arrays. It's just a dynamic array. Because in some languages, I think in Python, strings, lists, arrays are like, arrays and lists are similar. It's just like this kind of bracket you just do when defining your arrays. So literally, it's kind of expandable at any point. So another thing to note. And also multi-dimensional arrays, how they work, what they have. You need to check that also in your language. Now, Next is common operations. Let me clear. Yeah. So another thing to note in your language, the language you're going to be using, like know ahead of time, know how to access the ith elements, whether for strings, whether for arrays. Just remember, string is an array of characters. So when we are talking about elements, in this case, it's either a character or a user-defined array when you're referring to arrays. So you need to know some common operation, like how do you access a particular element in an array or string? How do you find how do you find the index, like doing the reverse parts? If you are, sorry, just one moment. Yeah. So I was talking about the fact that you knowing how to access a particular element in an array or string. Now doing the reverse of, you have an element, you are given a target element, or you are given a target character. How do you find it in that array? How do you find where the position, where exactly it is located? Or how do you iterate through it with or without index? In this case, what I mean is iterating using maybe for loop and iterating using for each. How does it work? How do you write it? Because those are things you don't want to go to an interview and forget. You don't want to forget how to write for each statement in your language, though it can be sometimes confusing, and due to nervousness, you can actually forget all those simple nuances. But if you have been writing it over time, I think those are things that should enter your subconscious realm so that it just flows easily. Another important thing is getting the length. If you're working with it, you will literally be using this, and you need to know how they do that in your own language. It is very different in every other language. So don't think you can just go to interview and just, game the interviewer, especially if God not catch you and the interviewer knows the language you're working on. So like in C# now, when you want to get the length of an array, we use .count or something. We use .count, and some other languages in Python, I think it's even len. Python is even strange or something. So you need to literally know this so that even if in your interview most times you are writing on whiteboards, you are writing on plain paper, you are writing on Google Docs, or you are not writing on a compiler that will be telling you the error. That's like the bad thing about it, the fact that there's no compiler there to give you autocomplete or give you or red underline that this is wrong, and you can easily keep trying or keep changing it. Here you at least need to know ahead of time and write it. And for some weird interviews, I've done one like that where they don't give you, how do they put it? The thing is a blank canvas. So it's an editor, but it's like a really, really dumb editor, something like using Notepad to write code. And you literally need to write the exact thing, write it well and correct, and then you will compile your code. So there are different types of interviews. So just know this ahead of time. Then the other ones you can know added to it is getting sub, like, because some questions are not literally related to you solving this. For some question, it can be that they will say, find the substring. That one now you can't use the language defined method or something. You have to write your own method. But for some interviews, you probably need to use the method to be able to do whatever you're doing. So you get the substring, how to split or slice a string or an array, check if it contains an element. You want to check if your array contains a particular thing, .contains, that's what we use. And any other way you need to check. Another important fact is to know the time complexity of each of these operations. Super, super important, because you can think that, oh, I'm just getting the length of something. If you are doing this, maybe every single time you need to like iterate through an array, you are getting the length. That's like overhead already, because getting the length naturally it's order of n, getting length of an array. So you need to know ahead of time so that whenever you're counting or calculating your time complexity, you can put it into consideration. You can tell your interviewer that, oh, I know the time complexity of splitting an array is this, so overall my time complexity will be this, to show that at least you know what you're saying. So I would pause. Does anybody have any questions so far? Any question so far?
Can you hear me? Good evening.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So you said something about strings and how copying, like replacing a particular character in a string is more of copying the whole string and maybe like. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So you said something about strings, like of how if you want to change a character in a string, you're more like copying the whole string than changing a character.
Yeah.
So that some of these methods as well, because then if I know that the way strings are saved is like more like saving like an array where each character takes in a particular memory address or something. So is it like when you do those copy, like it's that cost it takes to copy the whole length of the string to change a particular index.
It depends on how you are doing it. It depends on how you are doing it. I don't know if you joined beginning. I was saying that anytime when I was talking about that you should learn how to convert strings to arrays and arrays to string, in the sense that anytime you want to work with a string, convert it to an array of characters. So under the hood, that's what most of these operations do when it has to like modifying any string. For some languages, actually, it is like easier for you to modify the string, like when you just access the index. Like in some languages, they see array strings as array of characters already. Do you get? So modifying the string is like not, you are not doing anything, you don't have to bother. But for some languages, most languages actually, modifying the string is literally creating a new string. So you are best off converting that string to an array, which is going to be an array of characters. You can modify whatever you want to do in that array, and then convert it back to string.
All right, I understand now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna rush through the remaining. I'm like fast. So another thing that's like important, when we are preparing for interviews, instead of trying to memorize many lit codes and going there to brag and boast on lit code on Twitter that, oh, I've solved 1,000 lit codes. Well, you can solve 1,000 lit code and still get to the interview. And unfortunately, you will not be asked any of the questions you have solved or something that does not look like it. Like sometimes you see some questions like, where's all these questions I've been solving for all these years? What happened to this interviewer? So you can't predict. And since you can't predict the question you'll be given, instead of trying to solve as much questions as possible, try to understand patterns in questions. What exactly are they looking for? When they give you a question, what exactly are they trying to test? That's the major thing. That's like the summary of it. So ahead of time, even when you are solving your questions, prioritize quality over quantity. More or less like whenever I see a question, I'm solving a lit code question. What am I gaining from this? What did they test? What were they testing when they asked this question? So what approach did I have to use? Look at the question in that way so that even when you finish solving the lit code problem, you would have put in that approach and you have learned that approach. So you don't need to solve 3 similar questions that are probably testing the same approach when you can save your time and use it to learn some other things. So the major thing I'm just trying to say here is it's better to just learn patterns and approaches to problem, which is what is called algorithm, actually. Looking for the right algorithm to a problem instead of just solving problems without knowing, or just solving problem with the sake of, let me be fortunate enough to solve one of the problems they are going to ask me in my interview. So some common patterns for strings and arrays is, first thing is using either HMAP or using a, well, length 256 integer array. Many people use it a lot of time. If this one is for string majorly, like you just want to maybe count the number of occurrence in a string, or like you want to check if a string exists or this kind of thing. You can also use HMAP for this kind of scenarios, but some people just prefer that when you use a length 256 integer array, you have constant space in the sense that it's not going to change with respect to the input size. So that's the argument or something. But whatever. Using HashMap, we're going to do a the next meetup after this is going to be on HashMaps. So that will be like super interesting, and you would literally learn so much of this is going to make sense in that like class or something. But majorly, all you are just going to be, when you use this type of approach is when you know you are counting, either you are counting an occurrence, you are checking, when they say maybe check for something, or you need to store something that you are going to use in future. That is like when you use this kind of thing. So majorly count or like check. Just know that this type of questions require you to use HashMaps. 2 pointers, super important. This is like bulk of the patterns that are like for so many questions. So this 2 pointers approach, I don't have too much time, so I'm not going to explain in detail, but in your breakout rooms, you are going to be having a similar question that requires you probably use this, so you will learn about it. So majorly, all is just that you have a pointer that is running from one end and the other pointer is running from another end, and you need to like, so you use this when you need to compare, you need to swap. Majorly, whenever you realize that a brute force solution for something, like one solution, the solution you can come up off your head for a particular question is having 2 for loops. When you see that it's having nested for loops, it's probably, most likely, you need to use 2 pointers. Because when you're doing 2 for loops, literally 2 for loops is like 2 pointers. So you can as well just run that 2 pointer in just one stretch. Yeah. And most especially when you hear something like in place, do something in place, they don't want you to create extra memory, extra data structure. This is where you can use HashMap probably. So you can't store. You can't store for the future, which you would have done initially. So using that 2 pointer allows you to keep the pointer at one point that would have been the future kind of thing, something you would have saved, and allow the other pointer to keep running into the future or something. I don't know, I'm explaining it well, but generally you should read on it even after this period, even after this class. You can just search for 2 pointers approach, 2 pointer algorithm, 2 pointer questions online. It's like a super common pointer question. It's just about having 2 indexes at 2 different points, and you are keeping track of them differently. That's the thing. Most times when you hear a question of example of the question that they has for this is like maybe you have to reverse a string or array. When you're reversing a string or array and you want to do it in the most optimal way without having to use constant and without having to use any extra memory, the best way to do it is using 2 pointers where you have 1 pointer running from the beginning, 1 pointer running from the end, and you're swapping it. Simple. And or you want to sort an array in a place. That's an example. Now, sliding window, which is the next one, is like a glorified form of 2 pointers. It's literally still using 2 pointers, but what you're just doing is that in between those pointers, in between those 2 pointers, you are performing a kind of operation in between those pointers. Maybe when they say find a substring or sub array within another thing that this is doing something. So you put the 2 pointers where it's supposed to be, and you perform your operation between that 2 pointer, like between that pointer. That's like sliding window. But I am not doing a good job of explaining that. So please read, take time to like check these patterns online. and common questions related to them. So one last thing I want to touch on is common mistakes that most people kind of fall into when dealing with strings and arrays problems is, I already mentioned this before, not knowing the string or array operations available in your language. When you don't know how, maybe let's say, for example, in your language, you don't know how to check the length. And I know nervousness can affect us sometimes, and these things fly away. But, all these things just tell. Though people say, oh, they don't look at your syntax or they don't look at blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to say it's a lie, but, you just need to be extra careful in this life. So you want to know this ahead of time. And also the time complexity of an operation. So it's not just about knowing the operation, know the time complexity. It's important so that you can factor it into your overall complexity. And the last point is that modification of strings. Whenever you need to change anything in your string, you are better off converting to array of characters. Just be safe. It's just to array. Simple. In so many languages, C#, all I just need to do is to array. And when I'm done, I can just convert it back to string, wrap it in string. And yeah, that's all I have for today. I have these resources. I've added it to our GitHub repo also, so you can always check them there. And now we'll be going to breakout rooms where you're going to be solving these questions. Literally, you are supposed to solve the two, but I don't know. It's if time permits. We'll always start with the first one. So let me split people into breakout rooms. I'm sorry. Let me see. Let me create the breakout rooms. So we're going to have 4 breakout rooms. And I'm going to allow people to be able to go to the breakout rooms first, so that, because I don't think most people didn't specify their level, because we have intermediate and beginner, just like I said, and the practice problems are divided in that way. Most people didn't change their names, so I don't have strength to be trying to remember what place or what level someone is in. So I'm just going to create 4 rooms, and you can go to any of the rooms depending on your level. Don't go and go to the room that is not your level. Okay, so I'm going to open each room. Let me add the facilitators. Okay. Okay, so we have I have currently 3 breakout rooms. I have opened all the rooms, and now you can join the room yourself. So literally you will see breakout room. I think you will see like a blue button, and then you can click on each of those rooms to go to that room. And I can also assign people to the room though. So for the last intermediate room, so I'm going to remove this room. Let me see. We are going to have 1 intermediate for today. Please don't join intermediate 2 room. There's not going to be facilitator there. So just join beginner 1, beginner 2, or intermediate 1, depending on your level. So we have 1 intermediate room, 2 beginner rooms. If you're having trouble joining any room, just let me know. And I'm going to pause recording. I resume recording. For those that have been listening to this after, we paused the recording at the point where we went to breakout rooms. We did record the breakout rooms because to allow people to freely speak and encourage people to participate. For now, we are just doing roundup and summary or closing of the session. And touch point is just check the GitHub repo for any follow-up, anything, resources, anything is going to be shared most likely in this place. And always feel free to contribute your solution to the practice solutions folder for each concept. So for streams and arrays, you can come to streams and arrays, contribute your solution to practice solutions in that format. And that's all I have for today. So does anybody have any question? And I see you next. Oh, good. Okay, so I'm sorry, for an announcement. Next 2 weeks, we are canceling the session because Women Who Code is celebrating International Women's Day that period. So the next session is probably going to be in 1 month's time. That's a lot of break. I'm so sorry, but use it to take time to, reach the so kind of, there are a lot of questions you can solve ahead of time. And what we are going to be talking about next is hash tables, hashing, dictionaries, all those kind of things, hash sets. So you probably don't want to miss it. We'll keep reminders, we'll let you know that we are meeting again. I'm sorry we are having to wait for but yeah, that's the quick announcement. So next 2 weeks there is algorithm series. Algorithm and data structure series top. They're gonna be 10 in the next 1 month.
Hello, Hope.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed myself during the breakout session.
Oh, that's welcome.
But then I would appreciate if the platforms we have can receive activities as much as possible. Unlike the only thing we get on the platform most times just notification for these meetings and all. So we can have challenges being sent on that platform and other things. It can be more interactive
Like
so that
Slack?
it's not
Do you mean the Slack?
both Slack and WhatsApp, both Slack and WhatsApp.
So yeah, so the Slack is supposed to be interactive by you. You are supposed to make it interactive. You are supposed to be the one to ask questions. You're supposed to be the one to post your solution. Say, oh, I'm solving this problem right now. Is anybody on this trend solving this with me? Motivate people or challenge people who is ready to join you on the train to solve this question in the next 3 days. So you are supposed to be the one to make it interactive. What he said. Well, thank you for that feedback. I think I get that answer. Well, okay. So thank you everyone. For time and see you next meetup. See you on Slack actually. So like you pointed out right now, let's meet on Slack. Let us know how you're doing. Let us you know how you are taking this house, how it's going with you.